Awesome. So welcome everybody. We're here to talk about engineering teams management. Today I have the pleasure of welcoming Hector Reyes, who is going to be with us to talk about his experience as a project manager, as a Scrum master. He's had a lot of experience with diverse companies. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm really looking forward to having those. And I was talking to Hector before. I'm really looking forward to having those, discussions about how to get started, how to do things, because I know he's had a lot of experience and this is an area that I'm interested in a lot. So welcome, Hector. How are you? Can you tell us a little bit about you and your role, your experience as a manager?
No, thank you for having me first. So currently we're Agile Program Manager, which sounds a little funny sometimes, right? / Agile Coach / Scrum Master, a lot of different things. So I've been playing a similar role, right, in different companies, different industries, different setup for, close around 6-7 years. Half, or probably a little more than half of that was on the whole, normal traditional consultancy, working with different clients, dive in, dive out, parachuting. And then I transition to what we normally refer as an FTE, or now you are with the company. So the company's objectives are automatically your objectives. That's the setup that I'm currently in, which is a little different from consultant land. As you mentioned, I've got the opportunity to work with different teams, not just in locations, but in different industries, healthcare, which is always interesting, finance, telco, retail, and cloud as well, which is the current company that I'm in.
That's awesome. So you've had a lot of experience, and I didn't know that you were in all these different industries, and it brings a question to my mind. Have you seen that there are industries that are more prone to this type of management, or other industries that aren't, or is there an industry that's more difficult for this than others?
I think I think it has to do with leadership. The style of leadership. It's pretty easy for you to tell when something is like what we like to say, like old school management, and everyone's like business casual and everything's like super formal, right? Whereas you can go to another company that's probably a newer company, younger, that has a different vibe, that's open to more, open to explore different things. Usually those companies are the ones that are, I would say, a little easier to work with, at least with new ideas, changes in process, which after all, that's what an agile person focuses on, right? Which is like drive that change. How do you drive it? How do you convince people that's working? With industries like finance, like healthcare, it's pretty complicated. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but it is like an industry that works in this is what we've been doing and this is how we're going to continue to do it. So don't touch my process in a way, right? So, it's a little trickier than with others.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's like this is the way things are done. Don't mess with it. Cool. And another thing that bumped into my mind, you were mentioning sort of like the consulting work, and then sort of like the and by FTE you mean full time, sort of. So you mentioned that you've done both as an Agile PM. So what's the difference in the mindset there? Is it more of the way that you treat, let's say, the teams, or is it more of the way you feel, or what's the difference in sort of like the PM management there?
Yep. From my experience, right, and I know there are obviously different levels, right? When you join a company, when you join a consulting firm, and then you go work for a client, right? Like there's this example of you go and have a 6-month, probably to a year contract, right? And that's it. You've got your objectives somewhat defined, right? So when you're in that setup, I'm not saying that there's no ownership. I'm just saying that it's a little more difficult for you as a, you are driving change, right? You're driving cultural behavior, because Agile, after all, it's a mindset, not just a series of sequential steps that somebody has to follow. So it's pretty complicated for you to make adjustments to what somebody else, right, has already committed on your behalf. And that's where the tricky part when being a consultant comes into play, that you're like, I cannot really do things that are beyond my scope, beyond what my contract is saying, right? Because then I'm just going to get in trouble. And then there's this whole, the client dealing with the sales rep that probably put you there in that position. So that's what makes it complicated. That doesn't mean that you are going to be mediocre and just lay around and be like, I'm just going to do what you're asking me to do, which a lot of people do, right? And sometimes that's what the client wants. If that's what the client wants, you're paying for it. It's your money, right? But some other times you want to have that freedom to really educate everybody and train everybody and be like, okay, so we're all this together, even if I'm a consultant. So let's just try to be efficient, right? It doesn't matter if we call it Scrum, Kanban, waterfall, whatever. But that's a relationship that's complicated it's a little more complicated to develop, right? Whereas if you're an FTE, you're a full-time employee, you've got your fixed income, right? Like that's it, right? And you're in here with us. And that means that everybody's going to wear different hats, and we all have to, if we have to, we have just improvise, right? We just got to get the job done and be efficient, right? But that automatically puts you in a different spot, right? Like, okay, if you're asking me, you're giving me a green light to explore and do whatever I want, I'm going to do it, right? So there's no, I guess, probably legal limitation that you're not doing things outside of your contract. So that's why it's a little easier or more flexible, I'd say.
Yeah. It sounds like it's more of a constraint. You're constrained, you're shackled, versus being sort of like, okay, I can have a little more of a wiggle room. I can be freer in a sense. I can try to find better solutions. So I definitely get the picture, and I can definitely see that happening a lot in consulting. I haven't personally been in consulting, but I can see that. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, I can imagine, but and a lot of long hours too, from what I got. Cool. So moving forward, how big of a team do you currently manage?
The team I'm working with right now, it's close to, I'd say 15. 15, that's like the core part of the team, and 5 other folks that are more on the product side, almost like our immediate stakeholders, not necessarily users, right? But that's the team that I'm currently working with.
Cool. Is that the biggest team you've managed ever?
So far, yeah. I saw the question before. I think it is. So I've had setups in which I'm placed in more of an agile coach role, and I'm supporting like other 4 or 5 Scrum teams, each one being around 8-9 people. If we would consider that a whole team, right? Like the people that I'm working with, that could be the biggest one, right? But in that scenario, I was more of a internal consultant, right? Not necessarily belonging to a specific team. So I guess those 2 is where I've had the most, group of people working with me at the same time.
Got it. And your responsibility with that team, was it more of a mentor role, more of are you completely managing the project? What's the degree of responsibility there that you have?
You mean the current team or the previous?
I guess the current team. The current team would be, or if you prefer to talk about the other one, depending on.
It's a mix of both, really. With the previous one, it was more of a so you're the coach, right? Every team's already set up with traditional, just a development team. There's a product owner, and then there's a dev manager, right? And that's the setup for every team. But every team is having different ways of doing things, right? So I was going to, again, parachute in, analyze the processes of every single team, because they're all different. Even if they may have some dependencies, it's a different product. One team could be data, another one could be just UI, another one could be just a different team, right? So my role with those teams was to go in, analyze what are the pain points, why do you want to switch to Agile, or what do you think you want to do Scrum or Kanban, like what's that pain point, and try to develop a roadmap, short-term, mid-term, long-term. What does success mean to you? What are the metrics that we're going to be, basing our success out of? And then do that with all the teams, right? Some of the, I guess like some of the objectives could be shared, right? But through time, right, you realize that the same framework or the same mindset cannot necessarily be applied to similar teams, right? Even if they're sitting next to each other, the people factor always makes it different, right? So that was with the previous team, and with the team that I'm in right now, this team was originally part of those, 5 teams that I was working with, but I'm officially part of that team now. So now it becomes more of a, as an agile coach, but heavier on the traditional program management side, like again, that roadmap, but not necessarily in the process, but on the actual project. How are we going to, measure the release trend, and how do we know we're in time? Trade-ups, negotiations, all those things. So that's what the current teams. I guess it's probably like a hybrid.
Got it. Yeah, because I can see both things happening, right? So sort of like the more structuring, and here's the way that things are done. Come to me with questions, and the other side is the project management side, where you're driving that objective and doing that, a little bit of coaching, but also a little bit of pushing, so you're able to get to the goal. So I can see also how fun it is to sort of like put those two hats on and deal with a lot of different scenarios and different everyday situations.
Yeah.
Cool. And this is one of the questions that it's interesting for me. I don't know if we mentioned this before, but CodeSync is 100% remote team. So we've been remote ever since we started. So I'm always interested in talking to other folks and getting their take on remote. But first, before we move into that, have you ever worked remotely with a team?
Officially, no. Like, this is a virtual position, right? And everyone's going to be remote. Not like that. I've worked with teams that are, let's say I'm the Scrum Master, right? And the whole team's in India, right? And I'm the one having an interaction probably just with the product owner or with management here in the US. But my team, it's somewhere else, right?
I think that qualifies.
So, what?
I think that qualifies.
Yeah, probably, right? But so that's one. I guess the closest that I've been with regards to like all virtual was with the pandemic, right? Lockdown. The company that I'm in, it has the flexibility to work remote, but the culture, it's like everyone's going to go to the office, right? There are big offices, everyone just go there. But when lockdown happened, there was just no other choice. So I guess that transition was like the longest I've been in a full virtual setup. Like, you don't see anybody, it's just virtual, and you've got to improvise. And that's been, I guess, what it was, March, maybe late March lockdown. That's been like the longest I've been in a full virtual scenario. And it's fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, 5 months, 5 months of remote. Yeah, it's challenging, and the great. There's a lot of different names, and I'm always having fun with those names that they sort of like coined with the whole pandemic. And my personal favorite is the Great Lockdown. But yeah, I mean, with the Great Lockdown, everyone just got pushed to remote. So I can see that happening. And, specifically in your case, did you find that it was harder to work, or did you have a mentality shift, or how did that impact directly you and your everyday activities?
I think for like me personally, right? Like, Hector, for me, it was not that difficult, because I was already coming from a company before joining my current company. The company that I was working with, it was super flexible on that topic. But like, everyone was so used to communicating via Slack or direct pings or anything. So there was not a constraint around I've got to see the person to get the job done, right? If we wanted to work remote, we could just do that, and work was not going to get impacted or anything. Efficiency was not going to go down. By all means, so for me, that was normal, right? So fast forward, right? I quit that job. I joined my current employer, and things are a little different. So there's a different dynamic in the sense that people do rely a lot on face-to-face conversations, having those meetings that even if it's just 15 minutes or a minute, they'll just have that decision right there. And to me, that was a little complicated sometimes. And like, just a quick ping, right? Just a quick. I know that a lot of people are like, just don't ping me, right? But I'm like, the questions that we've got are not worthy of a meeting, right? So that's like so you get the point, right? So when we got into full lockdown, I knew what I had to do, right? Is just go back to how I was working my other company. The problem was with the team that I was working with, right? They were so used to sitting next to each other, having that face-to-face conversation, having lunch together, and happy hours and whatnot. That's where it hit us. Not pretty bad, right? But it was what do we do, right? So we've got to make sure that those face-to-face conversations, that collaboration has to continue to happen. It just has to happen somewhere else. And that's where, hey, let's try to start making decisions via Slack or via email, right? The things that would normally happen on a hallway conversation. Let's try to make sure that those are there. But ultimately, if you say that, no one's going to do it, right? You have to do it. You have to make sure that people see it as like what we say every day, like the new normal, right? Like it's okay to have tough conversations via time or just a quick call, right? The formality around having a meeting has to be seen in a different way, right? There's nothing wrong with just, hey, you're free to call 5 minutes. Let's jump on a quick call, right? That mentality, and that's what's been working for us, right? So that's obviously something that it's under our control. What's not under our control is how the lockdown impacts, emotionally you, right, and your team, and you have to be super aware of that, right? Like all of a sudden, you're like sitting in your living room. There are a lot of us that live in apartments, right? Because it's very common for us to live in apartments, and it's like, right, so just every single day, just for 8 hours, 9 hours, or whatever, right? Sitting behind your computer, and you have to be even more aware, right, of the situation the other may be facing, right? And you have to be sensitive around, does that person have a family? Does that person have, is he or she married or whatnot? Like, what's the situation for you to know how hard can you push in terms of driving that change, right? Because it's this past couple of months for everyone's like change, and then crisis, and then more crisis. You're like, and then on top of that, if you're like, hey, let's hop on a call every single minute, it's just, it can get out of hand pretty easily.
Yeah, I can see that happening, and sort of like it starts to become a nuisance, and then start getting annoyed, and then productivity falters, and then it's a sort of like a snowball effect, and sort of like a negative cycle. So yeah, I can see that happening, but it's interesting to hear the sort of like the adaptation process, and I agree with a lot of that what you said, that it's about being okay with that shift in mentality, and saying, okay, yeah, we can take decisions via chat. We can have an email instead of a meeting. We can have a quick call that's not scheduled, because that's another thing that also sort of like drives people crazy. So I'm completely in agreement with you, and for us particularly, and I can talk about my experience, that's been sort of like a trial and error for us. We used to be super lenient with calendar, and then we went super strict, and sort of like neither worked. And now we're sort of like in the middle. So you just sort of like schedule your daily, even weekly activities, leave deep work, schedules, calendar in events. And, any other time people are free to ping you and talk to you. And if you don't update your status in your chat, for example, use Slack, then you're also open. I mean, that means you're not, doing busy work or anything. So we've learned all those things, and those might be simple. And from if you're an outsider hearing, you're like, oh, well, that's of course it's common sense. But yeah, it wasn't. So, at the beginning, you don't think about it. You think it'll be simple and everyone will get it. But you have to be very, very, what's the word? Proactive and very mindful of doing it, right? Purposeful. So yeah, right. It's been interesting. So I want to jump, and I think we could talk about remote work forever, but I'll leave that, on the side for a second. And I want to jump into general management, because that's one of the other topics that I'm very passionate about. I think that there's just a lot of ways that you can do management, a lot of ways that you can interpret it, a lot of things that you can apply it. So, and I'm always finding ways of improving that and finding, small nuggets of information, gold nuggets, I like to call them, for me to implement on my side. And the first question that I love asking is, in your eyes, what's the role of a manager?
Yeah. Probably because of my background, right? To me, a manager, it's there to guide you, right? It's supposed to act as a leader, not necessarily as your boss. That from an HR perspective, that's the person that you have to escalate things to, right? To me, a manager has to be the one that provides leadership, that is aware of teams, not necessarily capacity, but predictability, that knows what the team is capable of doing and is able to make the team aware of where are we going, what's the value that we bring to whatever business we're in, and what is that roadmap, right? That is not necessarily just, the senior people are the ones that are driving the entire team, right? So to me, the manager is the one that brings transparency to the entire team, as in, this is what we're here for, and this is what we're going to be doing, and these are areas of improvement, and more importantly, it's a person that listens to the team, right? Because sometimes there's, depending on who you talk to, right? Like there's a functional manager, there's the people manager, and then there's some other leadership styles that are more of I'm going to tell you how to do things, right? Because the manager is now out of the sudden the person that probably had, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years in the team, and he knows everything. He knows the ins and outs of the code, and has been around for a long time. I just don't agree with that, right? Like the manager is supposed to make the entire team grow, be more efficient, right? And if you hire somebody and then you're just telling them, hey, this is how you're going to do things, right? Then what's the purpose, right? Like this, so to me, that's like the figure of a manager, right? That leads by example, probably, and makes sure that nobody's falling behind, right? And if somebody's falling behind, how, as a team, not just the manager, right, but obviously driven by the manager, but as a team, how do we make sure that everyone succeeds, not just an individual? So that's my experience, because when you're working in Agile, you have to do a lot of those things, and you have to lead or manage with zero authority, right? Because nobody reports to you, right? And then that's what makes it complicated, because you're in this tough situation because you're driving a lot of change. You're telling people how to be more efficient, suggesting how to be more efficient. And everybody can just be like, who are you? Like, I don't even report to you. Like, not even my manager reports to you. Like, why should we listen to you if you're driving this much change, right? So I've been there, done that. It's worked okay for me. So I found that that's what I can see successful managers have as qualities, right? That leadership versus just, I'm just going to manage things.
Yeah, and now that you were saying that, I'm thinking you must have amazing people skills as well, because you have to deal with all these different people at the same time and say, "Hey, do this."
Yeah. Well, you just have to, right? You have to. I know that there are a lot of people that disagree with that, right? And by respect of, like, everyone talks about success depending on how they did it, and this is how I did it, and it has been working for me. I don't know, maybe in a couple of years I'm just gonna come back to you and be like, hey, it's just like, hey, guess what? This is not working. That people skills, it's not my thing anymore. But so far it has worked, because to me it also has to do a lot of, attitude. Not just everything is about attitude, right? You can have tons of attitude, be super positive, but if you just don't know how to get your job done, right, people are just going to fire you. You're not productive, right? We are not hired to be nice to each other, right? So, but you always have to consider that you're working with people, right? Not with machines. So when you work with people, it doesn't matter the role they have. There are people, they have different personalities, different people like to hear things in a certain way. People listen when you do certain things. There are some engineers that when you lead by example, they're like, wow, this person's awesome, right? For others, they like it more when you are closer to them. You earn trust with them versus just being more like, let's have a technical to technical conversation, right? So for you to be able to, as you were saying, right, like put different hats and flip that internal switch when you have to, again, switch conversations from in different meetings and with different people. That is something that I guess you could probably be trained on. I've never found places where you can actually have a training to do that. But if you happen to have that, I think that's super useful, right? Because then you have that earned trust piece with whomever you're working with, and that is tough to get. And virtually, it's a lot more complicated than doing on a face-to-face. But yeah, to me that has worked.
Yeah, I see. And strangely, the word manager has nothing to do with manage. I mean, you don't really manage a lot, but I guess not 100% a manager. I think it's more of a half 50-50, sort of like more of a, and I always go back to this one quote I read from the Harvard Business Review, and it's the role of manager is to turn your teams or individual people's talents into performance. And I've always stuck with that because it really resonates with me, and it talks about the human side, even though it doesn't mention it, because it's understanding someone from what they're doing, from who they are, from what their needs, what their wants, what their emotions are, and then saying, okay, let's align that with what we want to accomplish. And then I think both sides move towards that. And I think that's one of the things that I love and how I personally approach management, because I feel that it's more about understanding, a lot about leading as well, but understanding and sort of like seeing, okay, we can do this and that, and this is how you can do it. And I think that's how you can do it. That's where the leading comes in. Because if you can show a better way and you can show that it is possible and it does work, because I think that's one of the things I've seen as well. Hey, let's do it this way. But I don't think that'll work. Okay, let's try it. And let me show you how it does work. And once you do that, they're like, okay, you got my trust. Let's continue to move forward. So right. I think that's one of the things I've seen it. And have you seen from your experience that, folks are very resistant to change? I mean, I think the obvious question is yes, but how do you approach it? Do you like talk to individual stakeholders or team leaders and then say, hey, this is what I think we should do, and sort of like list examples or previous experience, or what's your convincing process, if you will?
Yeah, well, it's almost like an art rather than science, right? Like to me, when somebody comes and if we're talking about management or the agile, right? Like let's just try to set the scenario in which somebody's coming to you with a problem, right? So that's already an indicator of something's wrong. And the reason why they're reaching out to you is because they're hoping that you're going to fix that, right? that obviously may have some conflicts with who's that person that's putting you in that spot. And usually, right, if it's director level or senior management that's just taking you and placing you there, like, I know that my team has XYZ problems, go there and fix them. That's pretty tough, right? Because you've got these layers of management, but you probably just work 5% with the top layers, right? 95% of the time, you're going to be working with people who, quote unquote, actually do the job, right? Engineers, managers, or like probably mid-level managers. So when you, at least what I try to do is, to me, it's super important to be able to listen, right? And to me, it doesn't matter how much of an expert somebody may consider you to be in what area. In my case, if it's Agile or Scrum or whatever, right? You always have to listen, because you have zero context on what that team has gone through and what took them to where they are right now. There's probably that maybe they had a different Agile coach. They tried it for a couple of times. It just didn't work out. And you've got to first understand the background, because that gives you a lot of, it already sets the mood for how things are going to happen. And talking to key people, right? It's also important, but not just, again, for me, not just managers. There are engineers, right? If we consider engineers are the ones that are truly forming the team, they have more weight than what they think they have in terms of, in terms of the leverage that they can pull to really guide the team, even if they're not managers, right? There are always engineers that lead the entire team without them knowing. So finding those key individuals, first listening to them, understand what are you trying to solve, right? Like if you could change two things, what would you change, and why would you change it, right? Like, why do you want to? And it's some of the things that you and I were talking about, I think 2 weeks ago. Why would you change to Scrum? Like, why would you change to Kanban? Is it because management is asking you to do that? Is it because the team that's in the other room is also doing it? Like, what's the driving force? So once you do that, to me, it's laying out not the rules, right, but the roles and responsibilities, and making sure that you come up with a roadmap that it's digestible. Right, let's just put in a scenario an agile transformation, right? And let's assume that the team is it has an okay setup to go to Scrum, right? Because not everyone should be doing Scrum, even though everybody considers it to be a silver bullet. It's farthest from the truth. But if you lay down the rules, right? Like these are going to be our objectives, and this is how we're going to measure success. Then for everyone is a lot more of, okay, this is digestible, right? And this is something that we can actually take, versus this is how we're going to do it, and this is going to be a transformation, and here you go with a bunch of meetings, and here you go with a bunch of documents on how we're going to be doing things. That, to me, that's maybe you're right as an Agile coach or Agile program manager. Maybe that's the way to go, but it's all about the perception, right? The team is going to feel as in, whoa, that's a lot. You're bombarding me with a bunch of crap that I'm not even aware of. And it doesn't matter how much training you give me. Yes, I'm going to understand it, but there's a huge difference between understanding and actually doing it, and understanding why we're doing it the way we're doing it, so that then we can transform it. So, I think it's a fundamental, the listening part, right? And I always come back to that, because when you're able to prove that you are listening and that you are taking everybody's consideration when you're trying to implement something, they immediately switch to, oh, this person is really on our side. That means that yes, he's going to be leading, but that means that we are all driving change. It's not just him being like, do this and do that, and this is how we're going to be doing it. And it's more of a, hey, this is not working. I suggest we should be doing this. What do we think? Do we want to give it a try? Yeah, let's give it a try. So it becomes more of a teamwork, right? So, to me, that has proven success, right? Even if nobody wants to do it. Like I've been in meetings where my first interaction with managers, right? It's like, tell me, why are you here? Like, why should you be working with my team? And you're like, whoa. Yeah, like kind of so, and then so tell me, what a Scrum Master should be doing, because I have no idea. Like if you ask me, why shouldn't I have a TPM, right? I'm like, whoa, okay. Well, obviously, right? So you have to be really good at reading in between lines, right? Which that translates to, how are we going to make sure that this is efficient, right? And if people like numbers, all right, you've got to understand that for this person, you've got to give them numbers. What numbers are we going to give to this person, right? If this person likes collaboration and team dynamics and stuff, all right, let's try to give a little bit of a lot of things to everyone, right, and make sure that everyone's covered. It's pretty complicated to do that, but that's what's worked for me. I wouldn't say it's, again, like a silver bullet approach. There's the human factor that you always have to be careful on, what you say, how much you want to change, how fast you want to change, because after all, you're messing up with the team, or you're messing up with somebody else's team. So, the dynamics there played a key role.
Yeah, and you were mentioning going and listening, and also giving them a voice in the decision making process. It gets them excited, it gets them on board, and one thing that I've always thought, it gives them ownership and accountability as well, because now they're saying, I participated in making this this plan, this or this idea, or this project, and now I have to carry it on. It's part of the, I guess, of our internal wiring, that we say, I did it, so now I have to take advantage, take responsibility for it. So I think it's also part of how that embeds in a team's mind, and it gives them that. And I like the way you put it about listening being key. And you also touched a lot on agile project management, and Kanban, and you also threw in there like Scrum. I think that's a nice segue into our next segment, and talking a little bit more about your bread and butter, and that's agile project management. And this is sort of like a buzzword from the past 10 years, I would say. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's less, but it's been here for a while, and everyone's sort of like, yeah, the Agile Manifesto, and everyone sort of like sees this as the holy grail that tech invented for efficiency, for productivity, for tech teams, for making great products that the big giants of the world use, like the Googles of the world. They're like, yeah, these guys did this, so now I should. But from our previous conversations, not everyone really knows how to employ it, and even if it's for them. So let's start small. You're the expert. What's the one thing that people normally get wrong or misunderstand about Agile?
I think normal scenarios, they think that Agile is going to make them go faster, deliver faster, right? And that when you are using Agile as a methodology and whatever framework you have under that, that somebody who is the face of the business is empowered to change things like crazy, like to change the roadmap like crazy, like switch priorities like crazy. A lot of people think that Agile was built or was created, right, to be just flexible. That's the main thing. Like, we have to be flexible, right? And in my opinion, there's a lot of people, I'm just going to put out there's a lot of people that disagree with that. And there's a lot of people that are just like textbook Agile, and this is what works and this is what doesn't. This is just personal experience. And to me, like going by textbook, it's assuming that every team is the same. Like they're working with the same people over and over again, same product, that the business is not going to evolve. And we live in, as you were saying, Agile's been around for a long time, more than 20 years, right? But if you look at the past 10 years, like businesses evolve and change like crazy, right? So what's trendy right now in 6 months? Like, what's new, right? So and so what, and that's exactly what people tend to get wrong, right? Like, oh, agile, right? Flexible. That means that, let's do this for this particular sprint, right? Next sprint, forget about what you were doing. Let's do this other thing. And then in 6 months, like, whoa, we actually didn't do anything. So what's wrong? The framework's not working. It's probably the reason why. So I would say there are a lot more reasons. There are a lot more, not reasons, but things that people tend to misunderstand about doing or being agile. But I would say those two are the most common, right? Which are
one of the things that kept bumping into my mind is, I think the definition is also very, it's just not defined for everyone in their minds. I think everyone has a different definition. So how would you, with your experience, with how you've managed, your teams in the past, how would you define it?
Define agile?
Yeah.
I would, and this is something that we, as a team, right, we went to a conference, I think it was about a year ago, maybe a little more. To me, agile is more of a mindset. It's a way of doing things, not necessarily a framework, right? Anybody can come up with a framework depending on what your situation is, right? If it's Scrum, what is that deviation of Scrum? Because nobody uses Scrum the way the textbook says, because it's just not real life, right? But framework, like that's, I don't think you can club Agile into, it's just Agile is a Scrum, right? Or Agile is Kanban, or Agile is about going fast. Like, to me, Agile is about being efficient. That's it. If I need to summarize what's Agile is about just being efficient. The point is not, and this was a quote, right? The point is not to be Agile. The point is to be efficient, right? And if you are, as a team, as a company, as an org, if you are just switching gears, right, to do Scrum just because you want to do it and there's no reason, it's not going to work. 90% chance it's not going to work, right? But if you approach it with a different lens and saying, hey, I've got a problem. I know there's a problem. I have ideas on what the problem is, but I have no idea how to solve it. And there's, collaboration issues. I have no idea how to measure performance. I have no idea how to, I don't know what my team is capable of doing, because everyone's just scrambling around, working long hours, working over the weekend. There's an efficiency problem, right? And that doesn't mean that Agile is the holy grail and the source of truth, or, hey, I'm just, like an angel being like, how am I going to solve all your problems? That never happens, right? And it's painful. It's pretty easy to understand, super complicated to really implement. So I would say Agile is all about being efficient, and it doesn't really matter. I guess it does matter a little bit, right? But the core thing is not how the different concepts and ceremonies and artifacts you work with. It's how do you leverage those to be efficient. And it doesn't matter if somebody comes and tells you, but that's not Scrum, but that's not Kanban, and throwing hate out of you, because that doesn't happen, right? It's all about, hey, you do whatever you want. This works for us, right? So, and if you're efficient, good, that's success, right? Because it's all about being efficient, right? So
yeah, I like that. I like that being more about the mindset. and less about sort of like, these are the rules, this is how you should do it. There's no flexibility. And yeah, personally, I agree with that. I think most of the things that happen in business are like, so they're a place where you can move and start. It's a starting spot, right? So a starting point that helps you, see and try. Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe you take one thing out. Maybe you add another one. Maybe you switch things. But it's that idea, the mentality, the way of doing things. And I like the way you put it. So I agree. And talking to other folks, everyone has their version of Agile, of Scrum. It's a thing too, right? So. But sort of like everyone believes that their way is the best. But yeah, I think it's we all believe we're doing the best in everything we are. So I can't blame them. Well, as an Agile PM, what's your number one goal? So to put it in context with your current team, what's your number one goal? The first thing, your North Star.
As much as you gave me a heads up that you were going to ask me this, I just couldn't figure out a way to answer it. Full transparency, yeah, I didn't know that he was going to ask me this, but I would say that to me the number one goal is that everybody, right? And when I say everybody, is that like the team, like the group of people that you work with, not just the engineers and not just the immediate manager, but as a team, right? That everybody is aware of what our mission is and how do we operate to get to that goal, right? What our goals are and how are we going to get to, like, what are those sets of, processes? What are those sets of rules? Who's supposed to play which role, and how do I, as a product owner, how do I, as an engineer, what is my role? Like how do I bring value to the framework, to the process, right? Whatever you want to name it. So to me, that's the number one goal, that you are able to go to any person in the team and ask, what is your role in the Agile setup that you have? And they're able to clearly tell you, this is what I do, and this is what my part is, and this is how I bring value. To me, that's the number one goal, right? Because that means that every other piece, right? And by piece, I mean, could be meetings, right? Like backlog refinement or plannings or stuff, and backlog health and other metrics. When you place them, right, in different, with different contexts and at different times, it's just going to fall naturally, right? Because everybody already knows, like, it's like, okay, so we're going to have this switch to how we manage our backlog. All right. Everybody already knows, okay, so this is what I'm supposed to do now. And it's not like, hey, whoa, you're introducing a whole new thing. Now we have to figure out, what am I supposed to do? Who's supposed to create stories, and who's supposed to do this or what? I would say, to me, that's the number one goal. I could talk about a lot of other number one goals, but right now, I would say, to me, that's the most important. It doesn't make that much sense, but to me, that's really important.
Yeah, it's sort of like it's clear in your mind. I've had those things when you're like, you sort of like don't know how to transmit that, but I do get you. And it's sort of like, because having that, like you said, everything else falls into place, and that produces results, and that produces sort of like, that leads to the other part of that, I guess everyone's looking for, that efficiency, that performance, that hitting your goals, that, getting your releases out efficiently, whatever. So I definitely get it. And I think this segues really good into my next question, which is, getting started. What are the initial steps? What's the first steps a modern manager should take? And let me put a scenario here. Let's say that I'm recently joining a team, or I'm building a team, even better, building a team. I'm not very well familiarized with project management or Agile project management, but I'm interested in getting into it. Let's say I already learned a little bit, but what are my first steps that I should take to implement this whole, framework mentality?
So in no particular order, right? So I would say that it's super important that you know who are your customers, right? Who are your users? If your users are maybe the team that's sitting next to you, if you're talking about a sales team that sits somewhere else, maybe your user for certain teams, right? It's the actual consumer of your product, right? Like having a solid understanding on who is your user, and the second, how does the team prioritize this work, like that intake funnel, right? Are we getting requirements from all users? How do we get them? What are different mechanisms in which we can get requests? Get email, somebody pings it on Chime. Maybe somebody's going to pick up the phone and ask you. Maybe there's already I'm not sure, like Jira or Rally or some ticketing system that's what you leverage to get your request. So to me, that's important. And combining that with the business, like the person who drives what are we going to do, right? Which is product manager, product owner, or whatever different name, right? You want to say, what's the criteria for us to say that something's important to worth of doing, right? Is it based out of revenue? Is it based out of, I don't know, just like a dollar amount? If this is coming directly from the CFO, if this is coming from the CEO, if our prioritization relies on whoever yells the loudest, because that happens every time. So understanding that's going to help you set up your framework, right? So that's understanding your surroundings, the who's, the what's, the when's. Then you would move to, in case of Agile, right? So let's assume that the team is not doing any of that. You obviously want to make sure that you level set everyone. Because as you were saying, right, it's super important, especially in modern times, that when you talk about Agile, when you're like, hey, team, let's do Scrum, let's just assume that everyone's like, yeah, let's do it, right? Super positive. If they do that, when you ask everyone, what does Scrum or Agile means to you, everyone's going to give you a different opinion. Everyone's going to tell you something different, right? And you may be talking to people that have done that for 5 years, for a month, for 10 years, in different industries, and they're all going to give you a different opinion. So it's important that you level set everyone to make sure that everyone's on the same page, that everyone, you can do a quick roles and responsibilities workshop, right? What is our team working agreements? How do we define definition of ready? How are we going to define when work is truly something that we can act on, actionable? And our definition of done. How do we as a team say that something is done? Does it have to be in production? Does it have to be in UAT environment? Does it just have to be done and then somebody else is going to take it and do some QA? Like all those things, when you put those, and again, up until now, I'm not even talking about, making tweaks and what everyone thinks that it's, their own version of Scrum, story points, hours, or whatever. Not even going that, or it's just going to, do we understand what we're going to be doing? If the answer is yes, good. That's all you need as a starting point, right? And obviously that you have your roadmap, because as much as a fancy framework that you have, if you don't have a roadmap, if you don't have work to do, or nobody understands what are we supposed to be doing, then you're screwed. That's it, right? So having that, hey, we've got this year ahead of us. How are we going to get there, right? So these are the basic set of rules that are going to help us get there. We're going to obviously work iteratively. We're going to improve iteratively, right? So, but that's obviously future, right? So if everybody understands what the current state is, that again, that mindset that we're talking about, if everyone has the same answer for yes, this is what we're doing, to me, that's how you have to get started, right? Even before you bombard everyone with stand up every day and planning every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and this is who's going to be creating user stories, because that's already like you're skipping everything else, and you're like, okay, let's just go and do it because I'm assuming that everybody knows Agile, right? And they do in their own way. So to me, that's the number one.
Yeah, laying the groundwork, making sure that everyone, understanding the problem. I think I would summarize as this. So understanding who's involved, what the problem is, what the objective, and what the roles and responsibilities are, as well as what we are working as a definition of Agile. I think sort of like step one, let's do that.
Right.
So right. I think that makes perfect sense in getting, everyone on the same page. I think that's important. And moving one step further, once we have that, what will be the next step?
I would say that it's probably potentially part of that, probably towards the end, is how are we going to measure that we're on track? How are we going to measure that we're truly being efficient, right? It probably relates to just metrics, right? It's just transparent. Like, how are we going to measure? Like, what are the numbers that are going to drive our improvements, right? And those numbers, it's important. And this is where obviously an expert comes into place, because if you delegate that task to a TPM, to a normal manager that's just going to be a people manager, it's pretty complicated for them to have the context on being neutral to the team, right? Like really, I'm just going to be objective about where we are. So if you define these are our goals, and this is how we're going to measure how are we trending in the short term, in the midterm, and in the long term, then that you're obviously laying this is how we know we're on track, right? And those metrics can be, just as an example, right? If you talk about, we're just getting started, right? Okay, let's assume you're doing normal Scrum, right? Oh, we're going to be looking at our burn down, at our burn up. We're going to be looking at velocity. Okay, all right, little by little, right? So those are going to be the ones, right? What does velocity mean, right? Okay, that's probably more of a midterm kind of thing. As you gather more data, all right, how do we as team read that? And then you start introducing different metrics, right, depending on your situation. So the same metric that you're using when the team is not that mature cannot be the same that you use when the team is more mature, right? Because you want to make sure that you're able to measure different things, right? But you obviously don't start the other way around. Like, you're going to be like, we're going to have this fancy set of metrics that I don't even have the data to support it. I don't, we're not that mature to be able to generate those. Well, it doesn't make any sense, right? So I would summarize it, and there's a really good metric that I'd like to use, which is around the committed to completed ratio, which equals to how predictable are we, right? Mm-hmm. It has nothing to do with velocity, and we can deliver 100 points, or we can deliver, I'm not sure what, 50 hours or whatever metric you're using, right? But if, as a manager, and I would think that every manager would love to have an answer to this, right? But if you as a manager, if you can 95% confidence say, this is what my team can do in the next month in terms of effort, and I'm telling you that with 95% confidence, it's good, right? Like, that's already that already proves efficiency, right? Yeah. Efficiency should not be measured on, we have to deliver more and more and more and more, because that's just not possible, and it's not sustainable. Unless you have more people every single week, maybe, right? But that's not the setup that we lived in, right? So to me, it's around that, right? Like, that second step that you're talking about is, as a team, how do we interpret those metrics, right? And that everybody understands what those metrics, where are those being pulled from? What do they mean? And how are they going to be used to really show improvements, and not leverage those metrics against the team, because that can get easily out of hand, and it can go pretty bad.
Yeah, it's more of the positive approach, where you're saying, like, these are the things that will help us drive our progress, not see if you're doing your job, and then if you're not, then I'm going to fire you. Yeah, I can see we're And I think, completely unrelated, but I'm just going to take a quick, tangent here. But I mean, that's one of the things that I think about a lot, and in my experience, and this is personal feeling, right? I have never I've never asked someone directly, even though I should, but a lot of folks are afraid of metrics because they fear that they will show when they're not doing your job. And I mean, from my perspective, I think metrics show you, yes, of course, part of that showing is, if you're not doing your job, you're not going to get to that metric because it's a KPI measure. It's binary, it's numbers. So it will tell you you're not doing your good job, but it will tell you if you are also doing a good job, and it's positive. It in both ways is positive, and I think that's the message I want to translate. I want to transmit. It's if you're understanding how not to do something, it's as valuable as knowing how to do something. Because if you get something right the first time, maybe it was dumb luck. But if you get something good after getting it wrong a couple of times, then you understand that you were progressively got there. So, understanding that metrics are there to help and not to something to fear. I think it's something that, it's the initial reaction. Fear is the initial reaction. But I think getting beyond that and understanding that it's more about guiding than it is about measuring, that it helps. And now, closing that tangent, coming back into the fold, and going back to the methodology and ways of implementing it, I really like the approach because it sets, again, I'm going to repeat this a couple of times because I'm really fond of it, setting the table, setting the framework, setting the foundations. And in our previous conversations, and I think you mentioned earlier in the conversation as well, some companies should not be doing Agile and should not be doing maybe a version of Agile. Are there any qualifiers that or maybe a checklist that you say, analyzing a company from a third party perspective, if they do this, and that, then they're not eligible to do Agile? Or is everyone eligible? Can you shed some light into that?
I think it would be partially yes when you say that everyone's eligible to do that, right? Because if we go by it's not necessarily a series of steps, but more of a mindset, then I think, like everyone, not just IT, right, should ideally qualify to implement some of those concepts, right? Again, not everything. If you publicly talk about construction, and you probably heard them working, right? I've got them next to me. Well, construction is not something that you're going to be doing in an agile manner. It just doesn't make sense, right? It would be stupid to do that. But if you go to, I'm not sure, like HR processes, right? Finance processes, like people that are working with you on marketing, right? They all have their tasks, their objectives, their projects, right? As much as IT people have, right? It's just that traditionally Agile is more of that's an IT kind of thing, right? Over the past couple of years, that's just changed to more departments within the company applying the same concepts, because let's just face it, it works, right? Because it talks about again, it talks about being efficient. Now, when you ask around who should do it and who shouldn't, I guess there could be some indicators, right? Like one of the things that I tell people is that I'm not sure you're familiar with the cone of uncertainty, right? Which is around how much do you, how well can you define the effort in doing something, and how well do you understand the project that's coming down the way? For a lot of us, it's impossible to know the ins and outs when the project's being created, and that's why Agile, it's a really good fit for a lot of people, right? Because Agile is going to give you the flexibility to, let's not wait until everything's like 100% certain. Let's just start doing something. Let's just start doing something, build a prototype, iterate on that prototype, because our users, the people who are driving those requirements, they don't know what they want. They want to address a problem, right? They're not giving you a project. If they want to address a problem, it's your responsibility to get creative and be like, okay, how how can I do that, right? So that's so to me, that's a good qualifier. So the less you know, the more you qualify to do either Scrum or Agile or any of those things, right? And then as you move farther out, and then let's assume that you have a lot of visibility into, your fixed scope, this is your fixed requirement, then that doesn't make that much sense for you to be doing Agile, right? Because you've got someone that's telling you, this is what I want, and I'm signing for it. This is what I want. So there it is, right? It's like a recipe, right? You're not going to change it. I'm not asking for anything else. I'm just telling you upfront, this is what I want. And you've got your players and players, you've teams all set up. Then that's like, hey, I guess you could, if you wanted to, you can execute in Agile, right? But it's not going to add that much value versus if you would execute it in a traditional waterfall model, right? Because again, you already have everything up front. Now, if that happens in real life or not, well, maybe not, right? So to me, those are like qualifiers. One other thing that I guess it's a tricky one, but if you have a setup or you're working in an environment in which there are tons of org changes, people coming and going, and your churn's pretty, everyone's just jumping off the boat, and then you switch people from one team to another. That is, well, that is obviously going to complete the lot with Agile, right? And whatever framework you try to work with, because there's no stability at all, right? I'm not talking about job security, right? I'm just talking about that driving change that you're trying to work for. It's just never going to happen. But it's just never going to happen because the players are just coming and going, right? So you never get to a point where the team is somewhat mature and on the same page that you're able to start doing some progress. So I would say those ones are indicators of people that should not be doing it. And the last and third one is that if somebody is just being like, let's just do it because I'm the director and let's just freaking do it, that's probably the third one. Like that doesn't mean that you should not do it. That means you should be very careful on doing it, because it's a top down and it's more of a, what I'm going to, right? If it's like that, it's just not going to go well. It's not going to go well. And I've been there, and it's nasty, right? So
it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I kept thinking about different company sizes, small, medium, large companies, and in my mind, I think it applies to all of them, because the small, you have a nimble team, and you need to be aware of the uncertainty that's happening, because you probably don't have that that closed loop project where you have this is 100% and it won't change. Again, it goes the other way. You probably will change a lot, because you can't think of stuff at the beginning that even when you release your first version to production, a lot of stuff are just going to hit you, are going to blindside you. And then you're going to be like, okay, I have to rethink, customers are going to start yelling at you. You're going to have to do, new ticketing support, and everything just starts falling apart. But I mean, that's the fun of it, not to take some of the fun out of it by saying that, but yeah, I mean, it happens. And I think, small business owners are one of the folks that should, get a little bit more knowledgeable, in my opinion. And if I'm not correct, please correct me, should get more knowledgeable about, what Agile is, how they can apply it in their business, and start lean, start easy, not get all complex with, we're going to have meetings every day, we're going to do all of this complexity, but start lean, start small. And I guess medium is where bigger teams are starting to come into play, where there's, I guess, 5 people to 10 people teams, and folks are using this to be more nimble. And, large companies, I think you just need to have it because like you're saying, you're too far away from the decision maker that you have to be constantly moving. So I think it's, I kept thinking about this, and all these different folks have different objectives, and all of them can benefit from implementing something like this. And one of the things that you were also saying is, you've mentioned in our conversation Kanban, and you mentioned in our conversation Scrum. So can you define them real quick? And then would you say that some apply to one type of company or type of tech team versus another? What would be the difference there, and who applies to what?
What I've seen, well, I guess it's a lot more common to work on Scrum, which is more of a time box, right? So we're going to have cycles, defined cycles, whatever, 2-3 weeks, a month, right? In some cases, and we're going to be shipping incrementally, right? So if you have the luxury to say, I can take this commitment, right? And we as a team were able to say, all right, so we're going to commit to do this for this particular time box, which is a sprint. Then that's good, right? So that already tells you that's a Scrum at a super high level, right? Whereas Kanban, it's more of a, I would say, and maybe a lot of people are going to just be like, no, you're super wrong about it. But to me, it's more of a repetitive operations, right? So if you have an operations team, right, if you're the effort of completing one task, it's pretty similar from one another, right? So you're always getting tickets, and you're going to be measured on cycle time or lead time, like how fast can you move, how fast you respond to tickets, how fast are you closing them, and how much time are those how much time are those sitting in a particular status, progress, or waiting for validation or whatnot, right? So if your setup, which traditionally it's more of an operations kind of team, it's like that, then to me that's more of a Kanban qualifier, right? As an operations team, it doesn't make that much sense for you to be like, let's do Scrum, let's plan for 2 weeks, because you know that in 2 days after your sprint planning, everything is going to go down the toilet, right? Because now you have more urgent things to work on. And the concept around time boxing something, it's just not possible. It doesn't add any value. There's this, the Scrum, if you take a look at it, once you start working, or once you click start in the sprint, then that it's like a Kanban view. Right, you've got your different workflows, you have your different stages, and everyone is in charge of moving particular tasks from one column to the other until you're done, right? But it's time box. You have to fix the scope, right? And if you've got the luxury to do that, and nobody should interrupt the team, then that's good, right? But if you know that you have to be super reactive to things, you should not be doing Scrum, and instead it's more of a Kanban, right? Because in Kanban, it's like, you are working with things that are average the same size or effort, right? So you are able to get your metrics around number of tickets closed, for example, right? Whereas in Scrum, if you say, the number of user stories closed, well, that's a little unfair, unless every single story is the same effort, right? Which it takes a lot of maturity for a team to get to a place where they can say every single story that we create adds value and it's about the same size or effort. It's an ideal state, right? But yeah.
What about production errors or production emergencies? These going against the scope of small, medium, large really don't get a lot of fires, but medium and small, fires are burning every week. So would those qualify more for Kanban versus Scrum? Would you say?
I would. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with having a hybrid approach. Obviously, with small and medium, there's a limitation of how many resources, how many people you can have within a team, right? If you're talking about large companies, they can just throw money, quote unquote, right? Like resources, just have more people helping. That's not feasible for smaller companies, right? So there's nothing wrong with having. I worked once with a team that they had their team that was dedicated to net new development, right? Like actual projects that are not, if a fire happens, has nothing to do with that project. But as you were saying, right? So there has to be that OE, like operation excellence person that's working on fires and things like that. And they always do that. We do that on a rotation basis. You've got your team here that's working on Scrum, for example. And then you've got this other person that's outside of this bubble, right? Tackling that. And everyone would take rotation to work on that. That's obviously in the example that you don't have as many people to have two teams, one that would be working in operations and another one that would be working here. The thing that I would not recommend is that if you are doing Scrum, right, if you have your sprints planned and stuff like that, try as much as possible not to include all the fires within that same sprint if you don't have to, right? Like try to have them at least in a different board, in a different place, so that it's not too destructive. But obviously to understand, right, that if somebody has to go and tackle a fire that was not previously allocated or accounted for, that you would have to do it, right? It goes to, yes, the framework is supposed to be flexible, efficient, right? So if somebody has to put up a fire in production, they will have to do it. And yes, you would have to sacrifice new development, right? So,
yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think it's one of the big questions that happen, and like, okay, so which one should I do first? And moving forward, what are some of the popular metrics? And you've mentioned a few by businesses that businesses use to measure tech teams. If I'm a business owner and I come to you and say, hey, these are some metrics. What are those metrics that have you seen businesses love?
So velocity is pretty common, right? It's pretty common and pretty dangerous depending on who you show it to, right? Because then people tend to like, oh yeah, we have to just increase the number there. With metrics, at least on the agile space, right, that's where I'm in, metrics has to be have to be a conversation starter, right? I know numbers are binary. It's a yes, you're performing, no, you're not performing, but metrics have to be shown in combination with others, right? Velocity can be shown in combination with committed to completed ratio, right? And show that picture, right? That it's not necessarily a good thing that the team is delivering 100 points when the previous sprint they were delivering, I'm not sure, the 50 or 60. Somebody who does not understand that, they would go and read it and be like, awesome, all right, 100 something plus % increase in productivity. Well, not really, right? We were carrying over a bunch of work. There are issues happening. So velocity committed to completed ratio, release trend when you have that flexibility to map out all your requirements, try to allocate some effort to them in hours or short points and whatever, and show you that trend sprint by sprint to hit a particular goal. That is something that gives you a lot of, to me, that's super helpful because that gives you a lot of leverage when someone says, hey, what if we do this extra thing? It's not a big deal. It's just a minor change. Then you can easily tell them, hey, look, if I place that change in here, adding the scope, our target date gets pushed out for about 2 weeks. And that's not me. I'm not making stuff up. That's numbers, right? So when you have that flexibility, when you have that, and when you work to get those metrics and those numbers are, they can give you that level of confidence because nobody's tricking those numbers. That is the best pushback that you can have, because you can say as much as you want to leadership, right? But they're always going to be like, just do it. I don't care. Do it. Figure out a way to do it. But if you've got numbers to back that up, it's pretty difficult to challenge that, right? So that becomes more of a, okay, if you want me to get this, I have to get something out.
Yeah.
Right? You pick it, right? I can guide you, but you have to. There's no way unless you give me more people, right? And even if you give me more people, it's not a guarantee, right? So I guess those three are kind of relatively easy to get, and they're really, really helpful, at least in my experience, in my current setup.
Yeah. And you were mentioning, if you want me to get here without moving that, I would need more people. So how do you make those decisions? How do you approach growth from a team? Let's say, how do you know when you need to hire more developers? How do you need to know we need to hire more folks? what's the process there? It's about just understanding those metrics and moving according to that, or how do you approach that?
It depends on. Well, it obviously depends on company to company, right? I think if you're able to have your team at least somewhat stable, right, and you get your priorities, and you are able to get to that predictability point that you can say, hey, my team is able to do X, Y, and Z, right, within a certain time frame, and we're super confident about that. If you're able to get that, and still you find yourself in a position where your customers are not entirely happy because it's just taking way too much time. But like that, that lead time for when somebody gets to your plate until you get it to the customer is just a lot. And then you have your customers waiting because something's in the backlog for 50 days, 100 days, and you just don't get to it. That's an indicator. I feel like, hey, we need more people, right? We need more people because we are truly delivering value, but we could deliver a lot more, right? This is obviously with the big assumption that the requirements or the features that you're getting are truly valid, right? Because let's just face it, anybody can come to your team and ask for random crap. Yeah. And they can do that, right? So they can do that. And you're going to be like, yeah, let's just put a pin on that. We'll get to that in probably 3 months, 4 months, knowing that you will never do it, right? So that should not be an indicator for, hey, we need more people. Why? We need more people to tackle crap work? Of course not, right? But again, as part of that feedback, if you need more people, well, probably just go and highlight, right? Where are we lagging? Is it on the UI front? Is it on the backend front? What kind of quality, right? Maybe we need some testing. And then usually for us, it's more around what's coming down that roadmap, right? And hey, that looks massive with the people that we have. We're not going to be able to hit that. So if you want me to hit that particular goal, then we're going to need, 2 or 3 more resources. And that's how you start that conversation, right, around if this is truly important for you as business, then we need more people to do it, right? So
yeah, I like that. I like the approach. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No. That's like perfect world scenario, right? There's always this conversations around. Yeah, but you've got a lot of people doing a bunch of tech dev, and you're tackling a bunch of defects. So yeah, everyone's busy because you're not, your quality sucks. Okay, good. If you acknowledge that, then yeah, we have a problem. We need more testers, right? So it's always a tough conversation. It's never like, oh yeah, I need more people. Yeah, go get it. Everyone gets more people. That never goes well.
Yeah, but I like the way you frame it. It's where's the pain point? What are we lacking, or are we just underperforming? What if the response to that question is, you're underperforming? Okay, then we need to improve as people. If not, okay, let's just bring more people in because we're lacking in this area, on that area, or here. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's just it's a very, very, very big world of project management. I think we could probably stay here for hours, discussing, the ins and outs of project management. I know you have to jump out of the call in a second there, but I do want to thank you for everything. I want to thank you for all your knowledge, for sharing it with us, for, sharing all these stories. I know that they are very helpful to frame what the role for Agile project manager is, what the reality of that is in the work scenario, and not in a theory world, as well as how you make some certain decisions. So I really do want to thank you for your time, and hope we can have you back sometimes, because I know we have some questions left that I would have loved to talk about. And again, we could have probably stayed here like 3 hours.
I know. Yeah. No. Thanks for the invite. I was happy to be here. And for sure, I mean, it's a topic that can get you going. And as you were saying, right, like everybody has their own version, everyone's right and everyone's wrong at the same time. It's super helpful to listen to others and what their experiences are. And by all means, everything I said, it's what's worked for me, right? I'm not going to say that I've been successful or have not been successful. I have my own ways of seeing what I'm doing. Of course, eventually that I've been, but I'm really happy and thankful for you to just give me this opportunity to share that. If somebody takes it and be like, hey, I can apply it for, go for it by all means. Right. So happy to come back anytime.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Hector, and we'll see each other in the next time around.
All right. Awesome. Perfect. Thank you.